everybody? It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. I am here with Teddy this evening. Teddy, I hope that all is going well with you.
All is amazing. Thank you for asking.
Not a problem. And of course, just in case nobody knew, last week Teddy celebrated his birthday. So happy belated to you. We're glad to somewhat celebrate here on the channel. And I'm looking forward to tonight's video because we are going back into our ultimate journey of the Ghost Machine universe. And we are going to be talking about the second edition, which actually, of course, was under the Mad Ghost label at the time. And once again, Jeff Johns teams up with Gary Frank to bring us the second character in his Ghost Machine universe. And that, of course, is Junkyard Joe. And of course, it is without a doubt one story to tell. And let's just put it this way, we started off with the first volume of Geiger, and I gave my thoughts. I told you I thought about it when I first read it and how it is now compared to where we are right now in the Ghost Machine universe. So the truth of the matter is, because of how I felt after I read Geiger when it came out, I sort of didn't collect Junkyard Joe, and I didn't really think about it at the time, but that was because of the fact that I wasn't really sure what was going to be the Ghost Machine universe in the coming years. And then based on what all the creators were and what the titles were and how they started off and how incredible they were, I said, I have a feeling that I missed out on Junkyard Joe and I really need to go and pick it up. So before I finish my ramble, let me just say this. I collect a lot of comics in a given month, and in a given year, there's a lot of stuff that's read. I would say about 75 to 80% of the stuff that comes out in a given year all across the board is everywhere from so-so to just okay, maybe sometimes good. But then within that 100%, there's about 25% of those books that are just good to truly excellent. But then there's a much smaller percent that you can just pick up that story and walk away from it saying, wow, that is like something that I've never experienced before. That's a masterpiece. And I have to say that I think that Junkyard Joe may be, if not is, outside of the work that he did with DC, I think Junkyard Joe may be Jeff Johns' greatest, most masterful creation, because finally hunting down those 6 books and reading this miniseries, I was blown away by it, and rereading it, I still cannot get over how great this book is.
Yeah, rereading it was a good idea. And that's why I like doing these because it allows us to reread it. And it was even better than I remembered. I loved it the first time around. It was even better the second.
Yeah, and it's very different from Geiger. So this book starts in the heat of the Vietnam War in 1972, and we see this troop, and we follow a specific guy who goes by the name of Muddy. And they get ambushed by the Viet Cong, and all of a sudden, one of the troops gets shot, and we realize that this is not a human being. Rather, this happens to be a living, breathing robot. A robot that doesn't speak, but let's just say that his actions speak louder than his words, and this is a flat-out killing machine. But what's so interesting about this robot is in those quiet moments, this troop of soldiers, particularly Muddy, he tries to get to know this robot because he thinks that there's something more to it. And during that time that they're in the Vietnam jungles, they actually develop some kind of an interesting bond, and it's quite emotional. I really do appreciate it. And we basically then find out that this robot was not supposed to be doing what it was supposed to be doing. Rather, it was supposed to be for different purposes. And we see at the end of that volume that Richard Nixon himself says it's time to shut down this robot and it's time to bring the troops home. And that's where that first issue ends. It's such a powerful first issue, especially because of the fact that Jeff Johns and Gary Frank do not hold back when it comes to war. And you are someone who is not just a big comic reader, but you are a very serious movie buff, and you have seen a lot of movies that are all about war. And I know that one of your favorite war films is 1986's Platoon.
Yes. And it
So,
reminded me a lot about Platoon. It really did.
yes, but it's such a powerful first story, and the question really was going to be more so once the robot and the Vietnam troops part ways, what was going to happen to Muddy. And it turns out that he becomes quite the celebrity. He becomes the infamous cartoonist Muddy Davis, that's his name, and
Mhm.
he made Junkyard Joe into a pop culture icon through a Charles Schultz like comic strip.
And the funny thing about this comic strip and what Muddy did was in his mind, he wasn't sure if it was real or not. This the idea of Junkyard Joe in the comics. It was based on his idea of what he saw in Vietnam, but to everyone else, they didn't know it was real. They didn't know what happened. So to him, he was this creator of, and this is, I think, to our next point, the creator of Junkyard Joe,
Yep.
right? According to everyone else. And eventually, in the start of the second issue, we see that Junkyard Joe believes that as well.
Yes, because basically, Muddy has officially announced that he is going to officially stop making the comic. Yeah, it looks like something out of Beetle Bailey. It's such a cute, nostalgic look to the character.
Yeah.
And he decides that it's time for him to hang it up. They're not really finding out why he's officially retiring, but the truth of the matter is, it's a personal story. He's lost his muse. His wife, that he had been happily married to, had unfortunately passed away just a couple months earlier. And that was the person that pretty much gave him all of his ideas or approved of all of his ideas. And because she was gone, he kind of felt that he had no reason to go on with the comic strip, and it was just time to give it a rest. And at the same time, we're introduced to a family that just moved in, the Munn family, and the father of these three children is someone who cannot believe that he is living next door to the great Muddy Davis. And he tries to connect with him, and things don't go so well. He tries to introduce them to his kids, Will, Emily, and Grace. And they're definitely three completely different children. Each one of them has a very interesting personality.
Oh yeah.
One's a typical teenage snob, one is a quiet, shut in type of girl. And then there's the other one who's just a typical boy who doesn't
The
really know
boy's
what
the
he wants
boy.
just yet. Yeah, the boy is the boy. But their father really wants to try and develop a relationship with Muddy Davis because he believes that this is a person that his kids can learn from, specifically his middle child, his daughter Emily, because she happens to be a really good artist herself. And while things don't go well in the first night, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Joe, the robot, shows up on Muddy's doorstep. And Muddy is trying to figure out what is going on here. This cannot be real, but apparently it is real. And I think this is where we start to see the genius of the Junkyard Joe story unfold, because Junkyard Joe does not speak. He is depicted through body language and expression, and it is
Eyes.
so strange. It's like, how do you get a robot to do that? But it is such an amazing thing that Jeff Johns does, because what's incredible is he understands everything that Muddy tells him. Like when he actually tells him that his wife passed away, because Joe looks at the pictures on the wall and he sees the picture of him and his wife. And when he tells him that his wife passed away, he actually takes his helmet off and gives him like a somber salute. That is so powerful, because it shows that this is more than just what he was meant to be. This is not a killing machine. This is a robot with a different purpose. This is a robot with a heart.
I was gonna say it's a robot with a heart, which doesn't like it's very much Iron Giant.
Well, except he doesn't speak.
Well, no, besides for that, but I'm saying like even this right here, this emotion, it's like what why did you saved my life? And then this is just the expression. And we see this expression with his eyes throughout the
Yes.
entire comic. And we kind of, and we empathize with his eyes. We kind of understand what he's trying to say just from his eyes.
And then what's really interesting is we also discover that there's actually someone out there that's looking for him. And again, depicted through his eyes, basically saying that we need to find the beta unit because that's apparently his original name. And then we basically go through a large portion of the story and we start to get to know the kids a little bit more. They all go to a new school. They all don't have a great day. And then we actually learn that there's a little bit more in common with the Munn family alongside Muddy. And that's the fact that they actually lost their mother. And they don't like the fact that their father doesn't talk about her, about how they feel that the reason why they moved from California to Indiana is because he just wanted to get away from the past. But it's so crazy how, again, it reminds me of Haley and Henry from Geiger. It's like when you see these kids for the first time brought into this story, you wonder, is this something that this story really needs? And Jeff Johns really shows you why these specific characters are essential. And the same can be said about the Munn family, because the Munn family has such a major role to play in these 6 issues, and it just makes this world and these characters so much stronger.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was gonna talk about also on a separate note, the PTSD of
Yeah.
Junkyard Joe, and I think that having the kids there also kind of helps with that because when she first catches him through the window, right? And then you go, don't worry, you could trust her, she's safe and this and that. You kind of see his expression also change because at first he didn't know to attack or not, but he had this PTSD of what happened in Vietnam. And it's interesting because he's a robot.
You don't expect a robot to suffer from that.
No, and during the issues also when he went to the town, which I'm sure you're gonna get to, so I'm not gonna talk about it now. But when they go to that person that I forgot what his name was, but to talk to
The person who works in the
about the
veterinary in the
PTSD.
veteran services.
Correct, the veterans place, yes, but you'll probably get to that.
But that's another interesting thing because one of the most important things that Joe does is when you take a look at Muddy in the beginning of the book before Joe shows up, you see that he's really trying to close himself off from the world. He really doesn't want to get close to anybody because he's basically at the point where he feels that everybody that's dear to him is gone. He lost his entire troop in Vietnam. He just recently lost his wife. He basically had his only means of escape was through the comic strip that he drew because he didn't even know if this character was real or not. And yet, ever since Joe shows up on his doorstep, he starts realizing, I think maybe there is more that I can do with my time and more, and that there really is a life after all of this. And that's why when Emily discovers Joe and Muddy actually talks to her a little bit, he's actually very impressed by the fact that she actually did some research on him because her dad was
Hmm.
constantly raving about him. He learned about the fact that he just lost his wife. She learned about the history of his cartoon that he was in Vietnam, and they developed a bond too. And through that bond, Joe develops that bond. And that's the other thing. To a certain degree, Muddy even helps Joe because it's like, what is a robot that was specifically built to fight in a war? What am I going to do now if there's no war? Because that was the other thing. The PTSD that Joe was suffering from, Muddy was trying to tell him the war is over. There's no
Hmm.
one left to fight. And so what do I do? So he decides, hey, maybe I can actually help Muddy. I'll clean his house a little bit. I love how there's a nice balance of lightheartedness, but then a real balance of reality because that scene where he accidentally breaks the mug.
That was one of my
That is a
favorite.
very powerful scene
That was one of my favorite scenes in the entire 6 issues. That was one of my
because
favorite scenes.
he feels like there's someone that just accidentally shot him. He thought that someone might have shot,
Yeah.
and so he's like starts to go into real protective mode. But at the same time, he's so horrified about the fact that he that he damaged something that was dear to a friend of his, and he's afraid that he will abandon him again and just like have him be alone for again. And it's just such a beautiful scene when you see him just like on his knees and he's just so upset. Yeah, that it's like, how would you expect a robot to be like that? It's so beautiful.
I mean, he goes, "It's just an old mug," because
Exactly.
it said what, a best
World's
wife,
greatest wife.
world's
Yeah.
greatest wife, and so I think it was a mix of PTSD, letting his friend down, gonna lose someone else, a destroy, and it wasn't Joe that did it. It wasn't Joe that broke it.
Exactly.
It was Monty. So it was a lot of the sound. It was that PTSD part of it for sure.
And then of course,
And
Muddy. Yeah.
going back to what you were talking about, another great scene, and I believe the same issue, was when the second daughter, was talking to Muddy about, after they saw it, I read some of your comics and your dad told me, and I also saw that your wife died. I'm sorry. He goes, "Where do you hear all this?" "The internet." And then he goes, anything will be on the internet. Just
Yeah.
talking about the internet at that time. I just found that to be funny also.
You want
But
to know?
she didn't see that
Yeah.
Joe was real. No
Yeah.
one knew that Joe was real.
Yeah, and you want to know what he reminded me a little bit about? Money reminds me a little bit of Mr. Myrtle from The Sandlot. He was like
Oh
that
yeah.
because, like, when you take a look at the fact that Mr. Munn is trying to become friends with him, and he just seems to be this grumpy old man, and he's so distraught about the fact that like one of his idols is just a guy who doesn't want to associate. But it's like when you find that common ground and you really approach it in the right way and you start to talk to somebody, then the personality and the person just starts warming up to someone else because the thing is, you could see that Emily is truly, truly interested in Muddy and his work. And that's why they make that really nice bond. And also the fact that when Joe sees that she is definitely not someone that's trying to hurt him, she can definitely start to trust him. But then, of course, Muddy decides to go into town and goes to the vet's services, and he actually introduces the guy to Joe, and he tells him exactly what Joe's been doing. Like all he wants to do is he just wants to be a helpful robot,
Right.
and
And he cleans.
he wants to find meaning and he wants to find purpose, but at the same time, he's also trying to get away from all the worst things about war. And it's
Right.
beautiful. It really is. But then things take a turn for the worse because the enemy officially knows where Joe is and he actually finds him. And then, of course, we get the, I would say that we get to the cliche part of the story because this is something that we have seen in so many stories, whether it's in comic books or whether it's in video
Yeah.
games or movies, so many times when there's children involved in a main plot of a story, of course, the big baddie knows that the way to get what he wants is to threaten the children.
Yeah, well, I think it's more than that because I think they were the only ones who knew where he was. It wasn't just
Exactly.
because it was children, it's because they were the only ones. They didn't tell the dad about Joe, especially when the siblings went then and found them, and they're like, "You can't tell anyone." And going back to all those siblings were not getting along. That family was not getting along. I feel like there's two stories in this one story. You have Joe, but then you have this whole family. And the idea of Joe and them knowing about Joe really brings those siblings together. And at
Yes,
the
and
end, we see that the whole family comes together, which I
yeah,
love. They had a hard time at school. One got in trouble for fighting, another got teased, all this stuff, and it was just shit hits the fan, and it's horrible. But the Joe once again brings people together,
yeah.
saves people, and I
Yes, and
love that.
I think one of the funniest things was I love how Jeff Johns is so quick because I knew that when we find out that the other two kids' names are Will and Grace. And the fact that
I
it
know.
said that exactly, I'm like, oh God, like the TV show. And then the next panel, Muddy says, oh, you mean like the TV show Will and Grace? And they're like, what TV
They're
show?
like,
I'm like,
what TV show?
I thought that that was so great on Jeff Johns' part to say, I know what you're all thinking, readers, and I'm going to
Yep.
catch that joke for you right there and then. I
That was
love that.
great. I love that the writers could just do that.
Well, that's what makes Jeff Johns the writer that he is. He's always two steps ahead of the game. And I also love that before the enemy steps in, Joe gets the opportunity to really take a look at the town. And even though Muddy is hiding him, he sees how so many people in this little Indiana town, even though he was really always buried in his work, how they all love and appreciate him. And then he actually finds out the reason why they love him so dearly is not because of his comic strip, but it was really also because of the fact that his wife was always out in the town and always working with the community, and how she always had a smile on his face. And then he finds out that everybody loved him not because he was a famous celebrity. They loved him because of who he and his wife were, even
Yep.
though he didn't make as many efforts as she did.
Yeah, and the reactions when he actually did show up in town was amazing. Oh my God, it's you, it's Muddy. Muddy's here. Can I have your autograph? All this stuff. And it's fantastic for
and
him.
and that's when Joe actually sees the good nature in people.
Yeah.
That's another thing that he truly understands, because that's another thing I think he was trying to figure out, because when he first came online, all he knew was war. He always knew that it was good versus evil, man versus man, gun versus gun, and he never really got to truly experience happiness and life after war is gone. And when he sees this little town and he sees how these people all appreciate each other, how they all work together to keep the community thriving, and how every single person in that community is an important cog in a giant clock. And if one of them is gone, it doesn't move. That's when he realizes, I think I may have found my place. But of course, the villain comes into play, and of course, he does the typical villain thing. He monologues, he tells us who he is. He really was out there to make Junkyard Joe a killing machine, and there were going to be a bunch more out there. And he was basically the field test subject. And he was called back, and then apparently he escaped. And his intentions, because they ripped him away from his research, and because he just wanted to continue to use this robot for the purposes of killing. It was like, war is over, but why stop there? I can go take down so many other villainous out
Right.
there. And while some would look at those intentions as good, mostly people would say you don't need to start a war if no one's trying to make a war. Why do you want to keep having war? And it's just a shame that he still had that on his mind, and how he still wanted Joe to be that. And of course, when everybody says you leave Joe alone, he constantly says his name is not Joe, his name is Beta. It's a very powerful moment. It's very emotional. And then, of course, I love how the whole community comes together at the end when the villain is finally taken out. The feds show up because people made certain calls, and they say it's time to take the robot back. And then Muddy says he is not going anywhere. He belongs here. And then the whole town gets up in front of Joe and says, if you want him, you got to come through us. He belongs here.
Well, because in the town there's a banner when you walk that says "Home to Junkyard
Junkyard
Joe."
Joe. Yep,
He was beloved. He was a beloved character in that town.
exactly. And when they finally see the real Joe, and that's the thing that I love, that is also very powerful. Outside of the kids, everyone else who meets Joe outside of Muddy, there's no fear,
No, none
because they
whatsoever.
all say, I know who you are. You're Junkyard Joe. You're the
Yep.
real Junkyard Joe.
Yeah,
And,
he was
and
made
that's
into a
wonderful.
positive character, but that's the difference between the Joe that we know with Muddy and then the Joe with the enemy, that created him initially, is that he was made as a weapon. He's a weapon, and he really is a weapon. But what we know with Muddy is that he kind of changed the way that Joe was because of the way that he was with him in the Vietnam War, playing cards, ask him how he is when he was off on the side, overlooking the river, while everyone else was playing. He brought that, like, it was about brotherhood, and I think that's another theme in this book is brotherhood.
Mm-hmm. And
And yeah,
yeah, and then we get that final page,
I
which
the final
apparently seems to be an MO for the Ghost Machine universe.
oh that final page.
And that's the funniest thing. It's like I completely forgot about that. Out of
Yeah.
nowhere, the Muns and Muddy and Junkyard Joe are actually out in the backyard having a barbecue, and all of a sudden a portal opens up in there, and there are two mysterious figures. One is recognized instantaneously, but the other one is not. And all that's said is, there he is, but we're here too early. We have to go back and fight. So now we know who that is. And we're not going to say who it is here,
We're not gonna
but
say.
let's just say that if you loved Junkyard Joe and you read that panel, if you're still reading the Ghost Machine universe right now, you know who that is because the story has officially gotten close to this point.
I'm not gonna lie. I literally, after rereading this, I messaged you. I'm like, wait a minute, that's him in there. And I was like, because rereading is so important, and I
Exactly.
was blown away the first time reading it. I don't know what it was. It was okay, fine, but then reading it a second time, we saw who it was. I'm like, okay, things are gonna come together.
Exactly. And again, I know that we had a conversation today with some other people talking about how, we've already talked about why are not that many people reading this book. And I mean, look, I was guilty of not getting Junkyard Joe right off the bat, but this is a really wonderful book. And part of me is not upset about the fact that, the big showdown is officially taking its time because I want more character development. I want more world building. And I love what we've gotten so far because my attitude is if you start a story and you start a character base and you start world building, and then you immediately throw them into a gigantic, epic story, I just feel that it takes away from what you're trying to create rather than just letting things go, let them fight a couple of battles on their own, let them jump a few hurdles by themselves, and then throw them into something. I mean, believe you me, they didn't do that with the big two characters overnight. Those characters didn't cross over for many years.
Right, but if people are gonna want to read because of crossovers and it's gonna take a long time, they might lose interest. But the thing is, I don't know how they could lose interest with these books.
And I don't understand why you're literally just going into these books specifically for crossovers. You're
Which
supposed to
makes
read
no
these books
sense to me.
individually.
That makes no sense
Exactly.
to me. Each book is good.
Yeah, because my attitude is going to be there's definitely something here. There's a great story being written here. There's going to be some monster payoff. And I mean, so far, look, we're not even into the main Ghost Machine universe just yet. We've only just talked about the two Mad Ghost titles that would eventually become the Ghost Machine
Right.
universe. So we still have a long way to go. But we're really looking forward to the next stage in this ultimate journey. The other thing that I wanted to tell everybody is that there is another story that you could try and hunt down, which is apparently part of the Ghost Machine universe. So in 2021 and 2022, Image Comics did a very special anniversary 12 issue maxi series called Image. Basically, what it was a compilation of a bunch of stories from lots of independent artists, different ones at the time, but different ones on each issue, but some are recurring. One of them was Jeff Johns, and he wrote a small piece of a large story in each of those 12 Image issues. It was called The Blizzard. So I read it bit by bit. It's now officially something that you can find in trade paperback entirely. And it was, yeah, that's the one. And
This is
they
it.
officially, that's it, yes. And it was Andrea Mutti who did the artwork. And basically they were calling it a Ghost Machine book, and I never really knew why they called it a Ghost Machine book, but now that I am invested in the Ghost Machine universe and actually took a look at it, I was like, oh, that's why. So I'm not saying that you'll lose any sleep if you don't read it, but if you really want to be a completionist and you want to read it, because I know we talked about the 80-page Geiger Giant issue last time. If you want to check out the Blizzard, feel free to check that one out. It is still a really interesting and
It's
cool
on
story.
Amazon, it's cheap, and it's a
Yeah,
good read. It's a
exactly,
great
exactly,
read.
exactly. So that's going to wrap up another episode of the Ghost Machine Ultimate Journey. Thank you very much for joining me, Teddy. I'm glad you had a good time. And
Thanks so
thank
much,
you all for
Steve.
watching. Please leave a comment in the box below. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. And we will see you in the next one.